Okay, now it gives me great pleasure to invite Graeme and Saggers, partner at Nolans, to join us up here. He's the head of the national tax team. He studied at Rhodes University and did his articles at one of the big four. You didn't state which one. They are in Durban, and they're one of the big four. But by the way, nowadays, nobody says who they did their articles with, but it's just not safe to say this. And he joined the Nolans team in 2012. Graeme holds a master's in tax cum laude from UCT. And he's also chairman of the Middle East Africa region of the International Tax Practice Group, or Nolans' international network of firms, the Geneva Group. Graeme sees his role as being the link between taxpayers and revenue authorities to enhance the environment where taxpayers feel comfortable with their tax contribution, thereby developing a level of trust between all stakeholders, which I think is really important. Graeme.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, there's a reason why I didn't mention which of those big four are my articles at. It's the one that starts with a K. Ends with a PNG, but I won't say anymore. That's a wedding cake somewhere. Cool, so yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit about tax and what's going on and what we're seeing in the current environment. I'd love to spend some time telling you about the new draft legislation on controlled foreign companies, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to today. But I'm just going to give you a general overview and some views that we're seeing and what we can expect in the future and what's currently happening. As Richard said, I joined Nolans 6 years ago, and I think it was shortly after that my colleagues encouraged me to pursue my passion for tax. I don't know if they realized what a terrible auditor I was, and that was the reason for it. But what I will say is the one aspect of auditing I absolutely love was assessing a company's going concern ability. And a big part of that is looking at a company's forecasts and assessing whether their forecast will enable them to continue acting as a going concern. So obviously a big part of that is looking to see whether the future forecasts stack up. But a secondary part of that is looking at the history and understanding how good these people are at actually setting budgets. So it's with that theme in mind that I want to take a bit of a look back into our past performance of our budget setting process, and then look at a few statistics around that. But before I go there, I'm not an economist, so I'm not too good with graphs, so I'm going to give you what I see as possibly the most complicated graph I can analyze. This is something we use a lot when analyzing tax policy. It's called the Laffer curve, and it's very simple to understand. What it basically says is it's a graph to establish what tax rate you should set in your policy in order to get the maximum yield. So in basic understanding, if you set your tax rate at 0, your tax collections are going to be 0. If you increase the tax rate a little bit, you're going to get a little bit more yield. If you look at the other side, if your tax rate's 100%, your collection's also going to be 0. Because people are either not going to work or they're going to evade tax. Right, makes sense? So the trick for government is trying to work out where this point is. The point where we've increased the tax rate so high that our yield actually starts decreasing. And around this area, it kind of starts leveling out, because you get to a point where if you're increasing the tax rates, you're not actually going to get much more collection. It's just your tax mix that's going to start changing. So my perception is that currently some people setting our tax rates think we're kind of on this level. My perception is we're probably somewhere closer to there. So that's a very basic understanding that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we talk through things. If we look at the past, this is our basic revenue collections since 2001. So nothing very fancy here as to be expected. It was a steady increase during the early 2000s, and then as global financial crisis hit, a sharp dip, and then some decent increases after that. Where it gets interesting is when you look at our expenditure. So pretty much in line over the years, then we dipped, but the expenditure carried on increasing. So obviously, if we are spending more than we're bringing in, our deficit's going to keep increasing. So I'm trying my best to keep this talk focused on tax, I like to think I'll leave the politics and economists to deal with those issues. I see tax very much as the unwanted, illegitimate love child between politics and the economy. None of us really want it. We all know that we need to have it though. And if we continue that love story, if you look at our history in South Africa, I kind of see the 90s as like the honeymoon period. You know, things were going well, there were a few fights, but we're still kind of feeling each other out, right? The 2000s, things were really good. We were probably spending more than we should, but we were also earning a fair amount. Okay, so things were happy. Then, like any relationship, financial pressure starts putting serious strain on the marriage, right? We start fighting, that trust starts breaking down. So we get to this point where one of us is spending more than the other one's earning, and we at this area, 20 years down the line, the children have grown up now, and they want to go to university and they don't want to pay for it. So we need to work out how to fund those fees. But let's look at the South African tax mix. I find this quite interesting. Everyone knows about personal income tax, corporate income tax, VAT. Those are the three big ones, okay? They make up a vast proportion of our tax mix. Smaller ones, so STC or DWT, fuel customs and excise, and other. What's hidden in other is something else we all know very well. Two other things we all know very well: capital gains tax and transfer duty. They are a minuscule part of our annual collections. And what's also in there, which is something that gets a lot of attention, is the state duty. Also a very minor part. So as my old lecturer at Rhodes, Matthew Lester, used to say, the only thing the CGT has done is cause people to fail board exams. If you compare it to from the 2012 area, we start seeing some interesting things. We see a massive shift in the tax burden from corporate tax, so that's dropped, let's collect that mix, towards personal income tax. Corporate tax pre the global recession was actually as high as 26%. So we're seeing a massive shift on the burden from corporates to individuals, which makes sense, right? Because as we go into recession, companies will get into an assessed loss position, and it will take time for them to build their way out of that. I've highlighted in here how small capital gains tax and transfer duty are. 1.29%, transfer duty 0.57%. The state duty I haven't even put up there. Okay? That's interesting to me, because you can look at that in two ways. You can either say, those taxes are bringing in so little, why are we even bothering about them? Or you can look at it and say, hang on, there's a lot of people with a lot of wealth in this country, those taxes should be bringing in a lot more, therefore we need to change some things around that. Okay. Alright, this is something that people quite like to talk about around the braai, the number of taxpayers per income band. Okay, so I don't think you can see the statistics here, but this block over here is the taxpayers that don't earn any income. The red block is those who are earning 0 to 70,000 Rand per year. The big yellow block is 70 to 350,000, 350 to 500,000, and then above 500,000. Okay, so those are the number of registered taxpayers at SARS. This is their contribution. Okay, massive difference. 0% coming obviously from anyone from 0 to 70%, 23.3% for those in 70 to 350, so that's the bulk of the taxpayers only contributing 23%, 14.7% of those 350 to 500,000, and then as to be expected, a huge burden on those earning higher than 500,000. Okay, so that's obviously putting a lot of pressure on those people. So to illustrate it a bit more, I thought I'd give you a different kind of illustration. We worked out some statistics. If we estimate, I think we estimated that there'd be roughly 100 people in the room here. If you can engage with me for a second and imagine that the drinks here are 10 Rand each, and each of you wants to buy one drink. Okay, so between us, we need to raise 1,000 Rand. What that means is that 61 of you are going to pay 1 Rand 80 for your drink. Okay, enjoy it. 26 of you will pay the normal price, 10 Rand. 7 of you are going to pay 24 Rand 30 for your drink. 5 of you are going to pay 44 Rand 40 for your drink. and one poor guy is going to pay 240 Rand for his drink. So to me, a key take home from that is you don't want to upset him. You don't want him to leave before the bill's paid. Alright, so what do? We need to raise a lot of money, okay? We've got increasing levels of expenditure we need to cater for. The student fees is obviously something very topical. We've got national health insurance coming up. We need to raise more taxes, but the pressure's already on the individuals. The corporates are struggling because there's no growth, and we can absolutely forget any discussion of increasing the VAT rates. It's not going to happen. So what do? E-tolls, right? Actually, I haven't spoken at Invented Droving for about 3 years, and I started with that a couple of years ago, and I realized that's probably not a joke. So I don't support e-tolls. Please don't send it to Graeme. So what the government's done is they've appointed the Davis Tax Committee to do a whole review of our tax system, and you'll see a lot in the news about them. Most specifically with what they've said about state duty, but they've done a lot of other things also. So the Davis Tax Committee is headed up by Judge Dennis Davis, who also served on the Katz Commission, who did the same process effectively in 1990, or started in 1994. So they've done, in my view, a fair amount of good work, a fair amount of good research, a lot of quite outrageous proposals, and a lot that's upset some people. But yeah, I think the key take home is their role is to advise on our current tax policies, but anything they suggest is not by any means legislation. It's just advice, and we've seen little snippets of it starting to come into our tax laws. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what they have released. So this is what they've released in terms of final reports. Their first report was a macro analysis of our total tax system. It's a really good document. So well worth the read. I picked up 3 things that stood out for me. What they said is our personal income tax system is progressive, yet it hasn't really resulted in significant income redistribution. So to keep further taxing the rich more and more, they don't feel is really solving the income distribution problem. They looked at our corporate income tax legislation and found that there are various complexities in there which have caused the opposite effect in that they've created grey areas, so potential loopholes. And interestingly, they said an increase in that would be less distortionary than an increase in corporate income tax or personal income tax. But they made it absolutely clear that they're not recommending that. Okay. They released a small and medium enterprises report, which didn't get too much attention in the media, mainly because it was released on the same day as the state duty report. So what they said is basically our small business corporation regime has been largely ineffective. They looked at a potential bad debt allowance instead of our current Section 12J being a capitalist incentive, and also obviously highlighted the need to address missed or lost taxes through the informal sector. And then state duty. So state duty, they raised some pretty extreme proposals, but a big one they said was, so currently you only pay state duty on assets above net assets above 3.5 million. They propose increasing that to 15 million, but then doing away with the inter-spousal free donation. They highlighted that trusts are a problem, which we'll chat a bit more about later. And very importantly, they said that wealth taxes won't work. That was their conclusion. Then shortly after that, we were visited by a nice French guy called Thomas Piketty, who did a speech at UCT, saying wealth taxes are the answer to all of South Africa's problems, and we should definitely look at it. So under pressure, one of the Davis Tax Committee's work in progress is they released a media statement for public comments on potential wealth taxes. And it was by far the most public comments they received on absolutely anything. And for various reasons which I won't go into, but basically the submissions that any form of wealth tax isn't going to work in South Africa. They've done reports on the base erosion and profit shifting, value-added tax, mining, and carbon tax. Those are still work in progress, so we're still waiting for the final report. But while this is all going on, I thought we could take a look at what's been happening internationally over the last couple of years, because often in South Africa we're very focused on our issues and we don't realize how much we're getting affected by the global tax law. So in 2008, as we all know, global financial crisis hit, and that caused Americans to start really looking at where their citizens are paying their taxes. So in 2010, Barack Obama released the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA, which is those nasty forms you now have to fill out with your bank or financial institution every time you do anything. And that's essentially a means for the American or the IRS to have access to financial information for any of their citizens, no matter where it's situated. Okay. Then in 2012, this nice acronym started getting a lot of attention: BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting. So what that is basically they woke up one day and realized that the largest coffee company in the world's profits are declared in a country that has absolutely no coffee plants. Okay, so companies like Google, Amazon, and Starbucks, they all got into a lot of heat for effectively shifting their profits into lower tax jurisdictions. These are tax methods that are entirely legal, yet considered to be unethical and not in the spirit of tax law. And that's why there were calls for them to start paying their ethical amount of tax, which I don't know what that means. And it's why larger multinationals are now voluntarily declaring on their financial statements what we call their total tax contribution. So they'll say, okay, yeah, my corporate tax rate is maybe affected 2-3%, but because I've got X many Starbucks stores in your country, my contribution to employees tax obviously raises my total tax contribution to your country, so I'm not as bad as I see. Following on from BEPS, we had a few nice leaks, the HSBC leaks and the Panama Papers, which were whistleblowers of those organizations that just obviously released a whole lot of information on their account holders, which caused a lot of people to stress and a lot of countries to start looking at amnesties, which eventually led into our special voluntary disclosure program, which ended on 31 August this year. That was also largely brought on by Common Reporting Standards. So what Common Reporting Standards is, it's an exchange of information agreement where most of the countries around the world's revenue authorities will be able to access information on their tax residents' investments or assets in that country. Okay, so what it means is that the days of being a global citizen and not being tax resident anywhere are gone. You need to have a country where you're tax resident. Each country will have what's called a TIN, a tax identification number, and the country, the financial institution where you may have investments will report to that revenue authority. From 1st of September this year, they've had to report on all the information within the South African net to all the foreign authorities. So there's about 50 or so countries that started from 1 September this year. The other 50 or so will be 1 September next year. We don't know yet how this is going to affect us. But logic tells me that what people can do with technology these days, it's not going to be that difficult for SARS to raise a flag and next time you get an audit, they say, hang on, we know you've got something offshore, please declare everything. So it is something, and that was the message we gave to people who asked us when we engaged with them on the amnesty process earlier this year. I just want to briefly touch on 3 new tax laws. I'll give a very brief overview because they're ones that have been reported a lot in the press and a lot of people are talking about it. The first is Section 1010. So this is the so-called expat exemption. So I feel that this is a very commonly misunderstood section of the Act. So what people tend to do, what South Africans tend to do is live in South Africa for a while and then go to the UK or go to the Middle East and start working there, and then all of a sudden just stop declaring in their SA returns or only declare their SA source income. That's wrong. If they're still tax residents, if they haven't formally or they haven't immigrated their tax residency, they still need to declare all their foreign earnings. They just get an exemption for it under Section 1010. Okay. So the reason why that's important is because in order to cease to be SA tax resident, you'll pay a deemed capital, deemed disposal of all your assets, except for South African property. So there's a large capital gains tax to be paid, which is a lot of people refer to as your exit tax. So what they initially proposed in the first round of draft laws was to simply delete that section, so to take the exemption away completely, which means that South African tax residents working abroad would have to pay tax on their foreign earnings, and then they get a credit for any foreign tax paid. What was quite interesting is when they released that initial legislation, there was a group of guys that did a whole petition, and the public commentary thing, they submitted their petition saying, look, we've got 8,000 signatories of South Africans working abroad that don't want this exemption lifted. And Treasury came back and said, that's very interesting because we've only got 4,000 of you registered. So that was their defense to say we need to do something about it. But in the second draft, they've made it a bit more lenient, in that your first $1 million will be non-taxable, will be exempt. Section 7C. Most people have heard of Section 7C, okay? Loans to trust. So what that is saying is, in a very brief way, historically, if you have a trust, a family trust, the way to get assets into that trust would be to sell it on an interest-free loan account. So the trust will owe you money. If you do that now, then SARS will look at that and say the interest that you haven't charged, they'll deem that to be a donation, so you'll pay donations tax on that. Okay, so your first 100,000 of donations tax is free of donations tax, so it's really going to affect you if your loan is higher than about 1.25 million at the current interest rates, but obviously that fluctuates. It's a much more complicated section, but that's a brief summary. And then the last one, which hasn't been spoken about too much, is trusts and controlled foreign companies. So a brief overview of controlled foreign companies is if combined South Africans own more than 50% of the shares in a foreign company, that company needs to be taxed on those South Africans' hands as if it was earned in South Africa. So the old planning, very simple planning method that people would do is simply put a trust in between, and the trick was that if the company is declaring dividends to the trust holds it in the dividends for a year and then declares it out, then there's no tax effects, and it manages to get around the controlled foreign company legislation. So they put in quite aggressive draft legislation to say, cool, you can do that, but then anything that comes from the trust is going to be treated as income in the future, no matter when it comes. So you can leave it in the trust forever, in which case you fine, there's no SA tax effect. But the minute you take something, whether it's a return of capital, repayment of loan, interest, dividends, whatever it is, we're going to tax you on full capital gains. So that's quite aggressive. And lastly, I really just wanted to touch on a few things that we're expecting to see affecting our lives in the near future. We're seeing, obviously, with all this exchange of information and as Willem was talking about, the increased targets by SARS and global tax authorities, there's a much bigger push for the compliance side of tax. So the compliance burden is increasing a lot. So I've just picked up 4 things of how we expect the future to change when it comes to our tax law. So the first one is blockchain. I don't know, there seems to be an article a week about blockchain these days, if very few people understand what it is. But basically it's a cloud-based ledger, if I can explain it by that, where you can verify transactions. What's interesting is that tax authorities in Russia and Brazil are already using the blockchain to verify VAT payments. Okay, so what that means is that if I sell Daryl something, that invoice is loaded into the blockchain and the revenue authority has access to that, so they verify the output and the input immediately. I found that quite interesting. That's happening already in our fellow BRICS countries, Brazil and Russia. So I'm quite sure that we'll start seeing that sort of technology, or at least experiments in that technology in the not too distant future. Okay, Bitcoin. When I asked Daryl on what I should speak about, he mentioned one of the guys wanted to chat about Bitcoin. That was 2 months ago, and I thought, absolute rubbish. Bitcoin is it's something that can disappear. I have no faith in it. In those 2 months, so much has happened. The 2 biggest things which have kind of changed my view on it is I read that Australia now have Bitcoin vending machines where you can actually withdraw Australian dollars, obviously, in exchange for your Bitcoins. And Pick n Pay even did a trial where you can pay for things in Bitcoin. So it's quite extraordinary. And then I read this week that I think it's a bit of a, or maybe a bit far-fetched, but Venezuela, because they're in such hyperinflation, they're considering using Bitcoin as their national currency. So it's a part of our lives, and we can't ignore it. What gets interesting is, what are the tax effects of it? Okay, so from a capital gains tax perspective, you don't pay capital gains tax on currency, right? So is Bitcoin the currency? And that's where it starts getting into almost like a philosophical debate. And if you ever want a good blog, I'd recommend one called Rolling Alpha. He did an excellent evaluation of the characteristics of what makes something a currency. And the biggest kind of determinant that I'd say isn't making Bitcoin a currency right now is that people aren't using it to buy things with. They're not using it to trade. They're buying it for its increase in value. Okay. And then you start getting into the capital versus revenue argument. So now are you buying it for the increase in value so that you can hold it over time, or are you buying it for the increase in value so you can speculate on it? So then you start looking at whether it's a capital good versus a commodity good. So there's still a lot, and we're going to need a lot of guidance on Bitcoin. But it's quite interesting about that blog, if I can digress for a minute, is we went on a whole journey in understanding why Bitcoin isn't a currency, and then looked at a situation in Zimbabwe where they're currently, in some of the rural areas, are allowing people to pay school fees with votes. And went through the same analysis and were able to conclude that in that situation, votes may be considered a currency. So it really raises this whole kind of philosophical debate. Okay, bots. There are many companies and tax authorities that are using bot technology for tax compliance. So obviously bots can go through information and audits way, way quicker than a human can, and they can work 24/7. So I have no doubt, especially considering some of the quality of personnel we've seen on the SARS auditing side recently, that they'll be looking to invest in. And then lastly, just to highlight the business of tax advisory. So we're seeing that our kind of role as tax advisors has become a lot less about tax planning and more about tax compliance. So my standard answer when clients come to me and say, how do I save tax? I say, don't get penalized. Okay, be prepared. Tax risk management is a huge kind of key word, and that involves from a company level, from a personal level, is to have a clear strategy of understanding what your tax obligations are, understanding what the laws are that affect them, and not to outsource your risk effectively. You need to be actively involved in managing your tax risks. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you, man.